This is Susie. Susie. خليكي نايمة يوم بفيق هالصلاة. اوكي. بفيق هالصلاة. اوكي.
All right. Hope everyone's well. So we've got 13 out of the, I don't know, 70 people enrolled joining us. So I guess this is at least some evidence that a lot of people really want an online section of this course. Can everyone hear me? I assume the mic is bouncing. So if you'd like to do a thumbs up.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. My bad. That's fine. No, that's good. Okay, looks like everyone can hear me. That's good. All right, everyone can see the slug, the banana slug, which looks like a kind of a banana pepper, you know? Yes? No? Yes? Okay. So you are being recorded, so just be aware of that. People are still trickling in, but just make sure that you know that there is a recording going on here and that it will be posted to YouTube, but it will be under an unlisted link. But this video will be used for CIS 436 and will be posted. Yes. Yes, it's kind of like a snail, Kareem. It's similar. So it's very slow. It's like a snail who it's like a snail who got kicked out of his house. You know, he just he lost his shell. All right, so let's close the banana slug, and we will discuss couple things up this week. So one of the things is that you have spring recess next week, so there will be no classes. Spring recess, well, this should be 23, but I did find out the dates themselves are okay. So it should be 225. No, that can't be right because this is, or no, it can. That's right. So yeah, 225 through 35. There are no classes that week for any of your courses on campus or elsewhere. This week we will be discussing the fragments. We'll look briefly at a midterm study guide, which is available currently on Canvas. And then project 2 is also assigned this week. So you're getting a lot of stuff kind of hitting the fan all at once, but you do get some time to ponder such things. I believe I did extend the due date for project 2 as well. I do think the grader is grading the project 1 assignments, but he's not releasing the grades yet. So he's got it set so that he can enter them, but you can't see it until he gets done with them. So when we get back on the 9th, again, there will not be any in-person classes that week. It will just be the midterm. Okay, so you will have it open during a particular period of time. If I can find it here, I believe it's under assignments, right? Yeah, so this is available on March 6th, and it will be available until March 12th. So March 6th, March 6th is on Monday, on a Monday, in about a week, and then, well, 2 weeks, week and a half, something. So Monday's the 6th, and then Sunday 12th at 11:59 p.m. You have to start it within that period, and you must complete it within 3 hours of when you start it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I doubt very seriously if you'll need 3 hours, but it is available to you. So the midterm study guide is posted. It is under this week's module, and the exam is a combination of multiple choice and true false questions. Okay, there are a total of 26 questions ranging in point values from 2 to 5 points. Okay, so there are 17 topics. Okay, 26 questions, but 17 topics. If you know these topics or are comfortable with these topics, then you should do pretty well on the test. So first topic would be basic Android OS concepts. What's the Android architecture stack look like? What kernel does it use? What libraries are available, etc. In other words, what the kernels, what's the underlying or the operating system it's based off of, and it's a particular pretty famous desktop operating system that's been modified to be used for these purposes. So should give you a hint. It's an open source operating systems kernel. Also, what libraries are available, what bytecode format are Android applications in, what is an activity, what's a fragment, which we'll talk about fragments today, what's an intent, what is a broadcast receiver, what IDE and companies are most involved in the tools, that should be tools and languages for Android development, what's IntelliJ, what's Android Studio, what's JetBrains, what is Oracle, how do you declare variables and constants, how do you make nullable variables in Kotlin? How do you safely access methods or properties of nullable values? So that's more of the Kotlin language topics we discussed early in the course. Know about control statements in Kotlin. So selection control, repetition control, basic object-oriented syntax. So how do you create an instance of a class in Kotlin? Do you need the new keyword? Do you not need the new keyword? How does it compare to Java? What are primary and secondary constructors? So that's kind of a concept we don't necessarily have in Java or C++. So you might definitely want to look in those. We have constructors, but they don't really divide them into these primary and secondary constructors. What are the custom accessors or properties? Know about the priorities of process states in Android. That was covered, I think, a couple weeks ago. Know dynamic versus persistent state. So those two have to do with state management. Know what views, layouts, and widgets are and how they are related. So what is a view? What is a layout? What is a widget? Can you give examples of a layout? Can you give examples of a widget? What's the most popular layout nowadays? Things like that. So now know what constraints are. So that's involved with one of the more popular layouts, the constraint layout. In order to use constraint layout, it's helpful to know things about bias, guidelines, margins, chains, and opposing constraints. Okay. How do you register event handlers? How do you do it in XML or Kotlin? So programmatically or in XML itself, right? Okay, so that's pretty much that for the midterm study guide. These are categories to try to narrow down your study. You are allowed to use notes. No pull the audience or phone a friend, but you're kind of on your honor on that one. But the topics on here are pretty well cover what's on the exam. So if you're comfortable with these, you should do reasonably well. And it should auto-grade it as soon as you complete it, so you will know pretty much right away what you got. So that's that. So are there any questions about the midterm? Any questions about the midterm? No questions about the midterm. Okay. Your project 2 is now available as well. So this one is a pretty popular type of project here. You may have done something similar, but in a console-based environment, depending on which instructors you have had. But the general ideas are to create a basic user interface, event listeners and handlers, test plan, which you should have done for the first one, fragments, and handle orientation changes. So this one will explicitly expect you to handle orientation changes. So the last one I was kind of like, as long as it works in portrait, I'm fine with it. It'll be great in portrait. This is actually one of the objectives. So you're charged with creating a simple calculator. You must satisfy the following requirements. So functional and interface requirements, positive and negative numbers, real numbers should be supported. You should be able to, or you should support rather, plus minus multiplication, division, and modulus, not percentages, like a regular calculator would think that's percentages. You should support square root. You should support clear options. So C would clear the entire display and the current calculation. CE clears the most recent entry. So for example, the last digit you just entered, okay? The user must interact with the buttons, not the software keyboard. So you should prevent the software keyboard from showing up and allowing them to type in an edit text or something like that. So if you do end up using an edit text for part of the interface, you should not let the user click in it and start typing, or tap in it and start typing. The app must also handle rotation and still be beautiful and usable, okay? Just like me. All right, so you can closely match an actual simple basic calculator such as the following. It doesn't have to look this close to a regular plastic calculator, but it should look pretty straightforward. So it could be similar to this. Obviously, you're going to have a modulus as well on here, and you're not going to have some other things. This would be modulus, not percentage, like it would be on a regular calculator. You can decide whether you want to put commas or whatever you want up here. Don't really care about that, but you will have to break it up into fragments. So that is one of the major requirements of this project. You should break it up into fragments, which we are covering today. The first, or the top part, would be a top fragment that will have the display bar in it. And then the bottom fragment with the buttons that you're interacting with. And as you click those buttons, it is sending data to the top fragment and displaying it there. Where the calculation takes place, I don't think I really care as much, but you have to use fragments. You can't just use one single activity and have everything done on that single activity or single fragment. You have to have two fragments, okay, just as it shows here. You have to use buttons and text views to complete the assignment. You must provide a test plan with at least 3 days on separate worksheet tabs indicating the tests that were performed. So you must use fragments, one for top display, one for bottom with buttons. If you don't use fragments, you will lose a significant number of points. We're talking like 50%, okay, at least. When you're done, you will zip your entire Android Studio project with the test plan stored at the top level of that project, and you will upload the entire zip to Canvas on or before the due date. All right, if there are any questions, please feel free to raise your hand through Zoom right now, and I will call on you. If you have any questions or need for clarification, you could also type in the chat if you have any questions. Okay. And I will generally try to read through them before I start talking. So if it's something semi-personal, I'm not going to just yell it out. Although some things might be like, I have a hairbrush stuck in my hair. Can you help me? And, that's not my wheelhouse. So you'll have to talk to your stylist. Okay. No questions, no direct messages. I think we're good. Okay, so that is project 2. Again, this week's fragments, make sure to study for your midterm at some point. Doesn't have to be over break necessarily, but maybe take the next couple days before break officially starts, or when we get back from break, even when the midterm is available, you don't have to start it the first day it opens. So you could take a couple days and just decide to study on that. Okay, so project 3 will be assigned when we get back, so there is some overlap with the dates on some of the projects. Okay, at any point during this lecture, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the toggle button to raise your hand, but when you are done, make sure that you put it down, so I don't think you have another question. Okay, I know some of you are probably playing Rust while this is on, but that's okay. You'll say to yourself, it's okay, I'll just listen to it later, and then you never do. So it's very sad. So I'm talking to myself. It's very bad. Okay. Fragments. All right, so introduction to fragments is in, I believe, chapter 37 alone, and then chapter 38, they give a specific example. I think, if anything, the book is maybe a tiny bit weak on fragments. Thank you. Some of you want A's. I see a couple laughs here and there. That's good. I think the book's a little bit weak on fragments. At least it could probably have done a couple additional examples. So I'll at least do a couple examples today, including a slight variation on the one that they do in the book. Thank you. But or cry, that's fine too. A lot of crying going on here. You're supposed to save your tears for data structures. That's the course that everyone likes to cry in. All right, so we'll talk about fragments, and fragments are kind of a foundational topic in Android. You will find that some of the stuff that we're doing today, there are sometimes better ways to do it. It will still involve fragments, but there are sometimes different types of fragments. We'll talk about navigation in a couple weeks, and that utilizes fragments kind of under the hood, but it kind of makes it a little bit easier to have interfragment communication and have different fragments pop up and things like that. So just be aware of that. But this is important to know, because then you might end up in a situation where you are having to do kind of manual communication between the fragments. It's still very viable, and it's still something that people still have to do. It's just Android's constantly trying to add new features. The team at Google's trying to add new features. So it makes it easier and easier, but it also can be very, very confusing. When you're looking up information on fragments, you have to be incredibly careful when you're looking at certain things like on YouTube. So fragment, Android. Let's look at this real briefly. I want to show you something. Okay. You will notice this one is actually legitimate. This would be probably a legitimate reference that you could look through the developer guide. But you might also notice this is saying certain things about some Android Jetpack library. Okay, well, it says this here. So navigation is definitely something we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks. And these other components work as well through through Android Jetpack, which is a set of libraries that, and architecture recommendations that will help us make these programs. One thing to note, if I can find, trying to see if they give a, maybe create a fragment or something. Let me see here. To get it to really recognize everything that's working, sometimes you might have to add this manually, which is totally fine. Probably in future versions, they'll just have it built in. But this is, notice that they make specific reference here, and this is important. This is kind of the important part when you're looking up information. If you have, like, for example, a video from maybe a few years ago or something you're trying to watch on YouTube and you're like, this doesn't look right or whatever, there's probably a reason. The fragment that they're probably using in some of the older videos and older documentation is not the same fragment. It's the same name of the class. It's in a different package. It does most of the same things. It has most of the same features, but you shouldn't be using the old version that comes from what's called the Android app package. You're supposed to use the Android X fragment app package. So this one right here, if I click on this, you can actually see this. For fragment, it says artifact over in the upper right-hand corner. It says Android X.fragment.fragment. This is the parent class of all those fragment types, and this is the modern version. There is Android .app fragment. This one is, yeah, this says the same thing. It says, hey, it's fragment, but it's actually deprecated. It's in Android.app.fragment instead of Android.fragment.fragment. So this one will even say this class has been deprecated. So you might watch a video, even one of a well-meaning person that may not clarify this, and maybe the stuff on their video is good, but they might say something like, well, fragments have been deprecated. Fragments have not been deprecated. This fragment type or this fragment class in this package has been deprecated. They've added them to the new package. It even says here, this old one, it'll say use the Jetpack fragment library fragment. Okay, so it's a completely different one, and that's because they are lifecycle aware. That's another topic for another day, but it's because this is the more modern version, and it is better. It has better support for the actual life cycle class that will help you manage the life cycles of other components. Okay, so it offers a lot more interchangeability and intercommunication between these different components and classes. And it also lays a foundation ultimately for Jetpack Compose, which is maybe something we cover a little bit near the end of the course, and that's kind of a more modern way to do it, but it's not necessarily the only way, and it's not necessarily the best way for all types of features. So just be aware of that. All right, so two different fragments. The one you want is the one in Android X.fragment.fragment. And this is even important if it asks you, hey, what library do you want me to include? You have to make sure not to get the one in the app. So Android.app fragment is not the one you want. You want Android X.fragment. That's the one you want. Okay. So a fragment, we keep using this word, and I've mentioned it briefly before, and I've talked about it, probably even defined it, but now we're going to at least formalize it and make sure that everyone's comfortable with the concept. So a fragment is a self-contained modular section of an application's user interface and corresponding behavior that can be embedded within an activity. It's actually very similar to an activity because it has its own life cycles, just like activities do. And they can be created and added to activities during application design. And they can also be added or removed from an activity during an application's runtime to create a dynamically changing user interface. So two components making up the fragment. Typically, we're dealing with an XML file and a corresponding Kotlin class, just like you have with activities. Now, the benefit is you can segment an activity's interface into different parts, like, I don't know, a display on a calculator and the section that has buttons and stuff on it, something like that. And so you can increase the separation of concerns. You can also, even if you're only using one fragment, you can make it a little bit smoother looking, the way that it actually interacts with you. For example, I might have like buttons or some sort of interaction components near the bottom in the main activity, or maybe in a separate fragment that just stays there the whole time. And then I can swap out fragments on top when I go to different quote pages. So it never actually changes activities, it just uses a bunch of fragments. And that is arguably, in some respects, maybe a better design. So some examples of what does the XML look like under the hood here. And there's different ways to accomplish this, but just be aware of what we have here. You have for example, I might have a text view in my fragment with certain text appearances, and then maybe some sort of constraint layout for that particular fragment. And then I'm going to load that fragment inside of the fragment class. Okay, so for example, I would have in Kotlin class fragment1 of type fragment, and then I have this onCreate view. Now, as mentioned, they have a lifecycle just like activities do. This is one of the lifecycle methods that the fragment has that the activity does not. This is onCreate view. Now, fragments also have onCreate, just like an activity does, but they have onCreate view, which an activity does not. It is recommended anything that you do related to the actual user interface, the view, you do it inside of onCreate view rather than doing it inside of onCreate. OnCreate would be stuff that's not directly related to the view itself. So for example, if you're connecting to a database, loading data from a preferences or a file of some sort, connecting to something over a network, something like that, that would be done in onCreate. But the stuff that you do here with onCreate view, that is supposed to be stuff that is related to the user interface. So in this case, you'll notice that the overridden function onCreate view takes a layout inflator, nullable layout inflator, container as well, and the saved instance state bundle. Bundle is how you typically pass data around among different components, and how you also allow data to be saved between rotates of the device. So keep that in mind. And then the way the inflating, when you see the term inflate, what that's generally talking about is taking the XML file and actually having it converted to, or like blown up like a balloon so that it becomes the actual user interface. So that's the inflator. All right, so this returns the result of the inflator. So it's going to return a view based on, say, some particular fragment, and then the container, which is the view group that it's inside of, and then I think whether it attaches to its parent in the parent lifecycle. I don't recall the third argument off the top of my head. This right here, this would be if you're not using view binding. You could, of course, use view binding as well. And in some cases, you have to make references to the integer ID of some of the parts. So that would still be acceptable, but I would probably, in this, I would convert that part to a view binding, but it works just like it does. Now this says we can inherit from fragment activity. It's actually the case that when you create main activity now in Android Studio, it creates app compat activity, which actually is related to the fragment activity. So you don't actually have to inherit from fragment activity. Should still work just fine. It is inherited from it. So you can just go about your business and usually use what they give you when you first create a brand new activity. Okay, but clarification here is that this, regardless of this activity is an activity. It's not a fragment itself. We'll see what the fragment looks like in a moment. So you could, this is one way, you could add the fragment using the layout file. You could have it in a this declarative way. You could put a fragment element into the user interface of, for example, the main activity, and then just have it by default load a particular fragment. There is a fragment container now that is better, which we'll take a look at. It's recommended that you use that instead for most applications. Okay. Using the XML approach with the fragment tag is easy, but it comes at a cost. You cannot dynamically remove the fragment at runtime. To achieve full dynamic control, you need to manage the fragments via code. Standard sequence of steps would look something like this. Create an instance of the fragments class, pass additional intent arguments through the class instance, obtain a reference, and then we will see that we have a fragment manager that does these things. So it begins the transaction. So that's basically opening up this transaction or this changing of the fragment. And then you add the fragment transaction instance. And then what you do is you call commit. So once you call commit, that will actually commit the transaction and replace the fragment. But again, we're going to be using some of this we're going to get away with because of using a fragment container instead. But we'll see it in a moment. So we've got the first fragment. Arguments. I would put parentheses there. Sorry about that. So first fragment is fragment 1, and then you'd say something like fragment first fragment dot arguments is intents, maybe intent dot extras, and then when you create the transaction using begin transaction, you can then call transaction dot add. Now this is really the magic where you say what am I replacing. So you basically say I am replacing. In this case, they use a linear layout. We are going to be using, in many cases, a fragment view container, okay, instead of a linear layout or a relative layout or anything like that, although you could technically use any layout. The fragment view container is better. It works better with fragments, and it's more aware of some of the underlying fragment stuff. So they recommend using that. So transaction.add, you tell it the placeholder that you're saying whatever's in there, I want to replace it. Or I want to add this first fragment to it. So that's how you would add it. You can also call replace as well. And then you call commit to actually make it happen. If you don't call commit, it doesn't actually go through the steps of executing the transaction you just created. Kind of like a bank transaction. You're basically setting it up here, but you don't actually confirm it or commit it until you maybe push the button and say, yes, I want that. Just like activities, 2 major techniques for handling fragment events. So you could have a button in the fragment with an on-click on it. You can also do the set on-click listener on the button, or bundle.button if you're using view binding, .set on-click listener. And you can do that just like you do with activities. Okay. Generally, our good practice would dictate that fragments do not communicate directly with one another. So a lot of times we're going to use or do communication via the encapsulating activity. They have started to create and offer newer ways. So one of them, which we'll look at some point after you get back from break, is dealing with the various data binding and lifecycle aware components. So there's other ways to do the communication that's even better than what we see here. But again, you're going to come across, almost guarantee it, you're going to come across code that is maybe in a slightly older style. Now, this stuff isn't like a fully deprecated style. They just say, hey, I think we came up with a better way to do this. So, hey, everyone, why don't you try doing this? This was slightly older technique to use, but it still works fine. So activity must identify the fragment object via the ID passed to it. And once the reference to the activity is obtained, or the fragment is obtained, the activity can simply call the public methods of the fragment object. Communication in the other direction is a little more complicated. The fragment must define a listener interface, which is then implemented within the activity class, but we'll look at that too. Okay, and then I go through a little bit of this and show you to create how to create this fragment example. We will look through an example ourselves, but this is showing you that you could actually start from scratch, but they do have a template that you could be using, which is for fragments. It's actually called there's navigation fragment. There's a couple other fragment activities, which we'll look at later on in the course, but this one is mostly starting kind of from scratch. So we're going to do an example that's pretty much from scratch, a couple examples actually, and then that will hopefully whet your appetite for the navigation fragments and other components that we'll deal with later on. Just a couple notes is if we see the code for onAttach, which will come up in a moment, it's called when the fragment is attached to the activity. Okay, so when they actually make that connection, onAttach is called. So that's part of the fragments lifecycle that is not part of the activity. Okay, because an activity is not really attaching to anything, it's just sitting there getting attached to. So note that fragments have an onClick and an onClick view lifecycle method. Any view related stuff should go into the did I say onClick? Oh, onCreate. That crap. Okay, onCreate and onCreate view lifecycle methods. Other initialization should occur in the onCreate method, whereas the view related stuff should go into the onCreate view method. On activity created, again, when the activity to which the fragment is attached is created, the on activity created callback method is called. That's a good place to register event handlers and things like that. So this was kind of a technique to use that is used and is still used, but can be used to be aware of what's going on with the activity that you're connected to. Okay. As I mentioned, though, they're starting to improve some of this with the lifecycle aware components. So they're starting to offer new options, which we will explore after the break. Okay, so let's do a couple examples. First example, let's see what we got here. So the first example we're going to do is just going to basically be just a simple fragment test. So you can see, we're just going to go from, I think, empty activity. We'll start with that. Make sure it's on Kotlin. I'm making sure it's in the Android work dir. We'll call it just, I guess, fragment testing 1. Okay. And we'll finish it. Give this a second to warm up and give us our Android options. Okay. So as I noted, you can see that this is already inheriting from app compat activity. And while we're waiting on that to load, let's see here, app compat activity. This one, you can see since it already inherits from fragment.app.fragment activity, which they were saying we should inherit from. Since app compat activity already inherits from that, it's already a type of fragment activity. So we are good to go with that. We don't have to worry about changing it to inherit from fragment activity. We can use the app compat activity. All right, so there's onCreate for the regular old main activity. Still waiting on it to get its things together. Most of that's interface building. Let me see here. I'm just looking over my notes here, making sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay, yeah. Okay. I guess as we're waiting, are there any questions about the upcoming test, the project 2, or anything like that while we're waiting? Yes, Abdul Rahman.
So a fracture is like, or a fragment's like a mini activity in a way.
It's like a sub activity, I guess would probably be a better way of looking at it. If you think of the activity as the entire screen, a fragment is any portion of that screen. You could have 2, 3, 4 portions of the screen. Generally, people stop at 2 or 3, depending on the application, but a fragment is kind of a lightweight, quicker way in a lot of ways to load the interface components into the activity without swapping out the entire activity. It's somewhat analogous to, if any of you have done any significant amount of web development, you might be aware of the concept of the SPA design pattern for web, typically for web, but it can be used for any application. It's a SPA or single page application. The general idea is with a lot of websites right now, I guess it's not identical to, but it's got some similarities with progressive web apps and things like that. But one of the techniques, the SPA technique or design, is to not reload the page every time and have that, that flicker with a complete load. What it does is it communicates with the server and loads a portion of the interface at a given time. So it's actually more efficient in some ways, and it also separates concerns better, and it allows you to have more control over the interface without completely going to a completely different web page and changing the URL and all this other stuff. So a lot of the stuff can be done directly in the single web page. Not sure why this is taking so long. It might be because I haven't run it on this particular account for a while. I ran it on the other account. It was very, very fast. So I think it's just downloading some updates and doing some configurations. If it takes too much longer, I will close it and reopen it and see if it gives me any crap for it. I don't want to start making the view binding just yet, because if I start with that, it's going to confuse Gradle even further, and everyone's going to be sad. So we don't want that. Let me see here. Good references. So just as a note for references, when you're looking for fragments, this is what I showed you a little bit earlier. Not that one, but the more modern one. Okay, so this one's actually kind of a good, I don't know if I'd call it a tutorial, but it'll tell you things about fragments, such as how do you create the new fragments, how do you work with the fragment manager. The fragment manager is obviously the one that manages the fragments. That's the one that helps you begin transactions and perform the replacements or additions of fragments, and also adding the transaction. Then what is a transaction? Are there ways to animate between fragments? So this would make it look a little sleeker. Yeah, this should not be taking that long. So I'm going to close it and give it a second and see if I can get it to come back up. There's no reason for it to take that long. And this computer is like 3 times more powerful, 3 or 4 times more powerful than that laptop. So it should be very quick. Now it's probably going to complain at me because I was like, you closed it. I wasn't ready. Okay. Or it may say, hey, you have to wait even longer. Oh, good. Of course. Yeah. Error now. Well, let's see what happens. We'll let Gradle sync and see if it can recover whatever happened. If not, we'll try something else. Okay. So yeah. So just as a little bit of another point about fragments is that they support modularity. So that wasn't really covered in the slides as well. So I figured I'd bring you over here. If you have a small screen, it would be probably important that you only take advantage of the real estate that you have available to you. And the same thing with a large screen, you have more quote real estate available to you. So maybe you want all the options related to different things that you can do in the application. But whereas here you would want it to maybe have them all kind of compressed along the bottom, and maybe only one recycler or list view up here, whereas here you have a lot more real estate to deal with, so you might want to do two of them because you've got a larger screen. So you can actually make it so that it knows, depending on what screen it's on, it's going to be taking advantage of different versions of the application as a result. Okay, so let me see here. Where's our friend here? Man, this is taking absolutely forever. That is just terrible. Terrible, terrible. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Oh, it's doing something. Anyone lose their power? Any fun times losing your power this week? Anyone connected to the internet by candlelight?
By candlelight.
Yes, by candlelight. Yeah, it's extra
Pretty
fiery.
funny.
It's candlelight. It's like optical fiber, but it's even faster because it's literally the speed of light. Okay, at that, Android Studio was like, that was a terrible joke. Please just open this and keep going. All right. So we've got, oh my gosh. What if you had a tree fall on your house? Well, that's no bueno. That's no bueno at all. Trees falling on houses are bad. I have a friend who actually, well, both of them, the guy and his wife own a farm down in, I think, Monroe, maybe, or somewhere in that area, Newportish, I don't know. But they have a rather large farm, and a gigantanimous tree fell on their garage, but luckily none of their all of their animals ended up okay and nothing hit their house. But that's terrible. There's a lot of, I have a friend working for DPW in Dearborn right now, and he's literally in the tree crew, and he said there's about a down tree on every block in Dearborn right now. So it's quite a mess. It was quite nasty. So some of us were not so fortunate, some of us were, and it's thankful nothing came blowing through my house, but I know a lot of you ended up with some damage, so I'm sorry to hear that. That's no bueno. Okay, so for this one, what we're going to do is we are going to, I guess, enable view binding. That's probably the first thing we want to do. So let's do that. Build features. View binding is true. And sync it. And then we probably want to get a couple fragments set up as well before we try to do anything with main activity. Okay, so let's go, and I'm going to right click the com.proc.jpball fragment testing, so kind of our main package here. I'm going to go to new, and then go down to fragment, and I'm going to just create a blank fragment. So new fragment blank. And I'm going to call it first fragment. You'll notice it will create a corresponding layout. Okay, and you have to make sure the source language is set. It will create a corresponding layout, typically with the name kind of reversed here. It'll say fragment _ first. It automatically picked up on that. I'm going to hit finish. And then I'm going to create another one. So this one's going to also be another blank fragment. And then this one is going to be called second fragment. Okay, so we'll do that. Finish. Okay, back to our friend main activity for a moment. I'm going to get the binding set up. And also a couple other things we're going to add, but let me get that first. Late init binding of type activity main binding. And var binding of type activity main binding. I can tell it to import it, and it will import it here under the data binding. It has actually generated this class again, as mentioned before. Anytime you add that build features, that's why it's in a section called build features, because that's when it goes about building, which Gradle is a build tool. when it goes about building your application, it will actually look at any fragments or activities you've created, and it will create a corresponding binding class to help you work with the actual binding features. So it's actually pretty nice. Now, another thing we might want to do, since we're going to be dealing with two different fragments, this one, the only thing this is going to do is it's going to allow me to click a button and then switch between the two fragments on the same activity. So that's kind of our first step. It's very, very simple, but it's important so that we can know what's going on. So which fragment, I'm going to set that to 1 to start with. And then on create, I'm going to fix my binding here. Binding equals activity main binding dot inflate. And then I'm going to take the layout inflator. If you're using Java, it would be get layout inflator, just as another note. And then binding dot root, it would be get root method in Java instead of a root property. So just be aware of that. The next thing I want to do is I want to have binding dot btn change. Oh, you know what? I haven't even set up the interface yet, so I'm going to probably wait on that, right? So let's get activity main set up here. I'm going to delete that. You know what? Here, I'm going to close the Kotlin files for now and just focus on the interface for right now. Okay, so the first and the second fragments, let's do that. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to right click frame layout. And there's actually, you could click convert view and then choose from a list, or you can just say convert frame layout to constraint layout. It's so popular that they make its own option on the list for that. So let's right click that and then convert frame layout to constraint layout. I'm going to hit OK. And it still calls it frame layout, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to rename it. I'm going to just call it constraint, or well, let's call it first fragment layout. Okay. Oh, fragment. I don't want that. Fragment. Okay. Spelling, guys, spelling. Okay. All right. It's kind of, if you go to rate my professor, but you misspell some things, it's not a good website. So first fragment layout, and then we've got this text view right here. This one right here is not doing much of its in and of itself. So it's basically got the whole screen occupied, and it's not really great. So what I want to do is I want to take this and change it to wrap content and change the height to wrap content also. You'll notice it has opposing constraints automatically. It just, because we converted to a completely different layout, it was trying to interpret maybe what the wishes were from when it was a, whatever it was, a relative layout or a linear layout or whatever. So we've got first fragment layout and then the text view. I'm not changing the data on this, so I don't really care about that, but I will be changing the text, but not the, I'm not changing the data programmatically. So I'm just going to change this text so that it says, hi, this is the first fragment, something like that. And then maybe go down and find the text size. Okay. And we're going to change that to 20, maybe make it a little bit bigger. And we could do a lot of other cool stuff. Maybe, I don't know, change the, let me see here. What kind of options do we have here? We have background tents. That's nice. I wonder if I can, is that doing it? That's not doing it. That's not going to do it, I don't think. It might have to be just background, not tent. Okay, let's do background. Let's see if it lets me do that. Yeah, so you could change the background color if you want to make it a little bit nicer or different at least. Okay, so we'll make that kind of a reddish color. All right, nothing too fancy with this. The fragment second, kind of the same thing here. Oh, it was a frame layout. That's what it was. So I'm going to convert the frame layout to the constraint layout. And I'm going to do kind of the same thing I did before. I'm going to click that text view inside of it, and I'm going to make sure that it is wrapping content instead of matching the constraint. And now it says hello blank fragment again. And this one's going to, I'll just give it an ID, even though I'm not really doing it. I'll just call it second fragment layout. This one I am actually utilizing because we have to tell it the name when we're swapping out the fragment. So I am naming the fragment, but I don't really care about the text view. So this one, I'm going to change the text from the string resource that they're using. And for this one, I'm going to say, howdy, welcome to second fragment. Okay, so this one's from the south, of course. This is a Texan fragment. If I scroll down here, change the text size to, we'll say 20, looking pretty good. Maybe we'll do, let me see here. Let's, you know what? Yeah, let's see what we have available here. Let's do like a yellow, and then we'll do a darker background. So we got yellow, and then we'll do, just to make it obvious what we're doing here, background, background, background. Where are you? Probably in alphabetical order because it's alphabetical. All right, so we'll do maybe a blue. There we go. That's very Michigan-y, right? I like it. Okay. So we've got this. I could make the other one Ohio State, but I don't want to make any of you ill. So I'm not going to use their colors. So we've got the welcome to second fragment. That's almost a purple, but we'll deal with it. We'll pretend it's blue. Yay, hail to the victors. Okay, so I'm going to close both of these. They both have a different color, so it's really obvious what's opening, and they both have different text. Everything's happy. In this constraint layout for the activity, however, I don't really have anything on this yet. You'll notice that one of the common things that's available in the palette, you don't even have to go looking for it or look under container down here. Under common is fragment container view. Okay, so I'm going to drag that here. And this is kind of a goofy interface here. It looks like it's kind of weirded out. I don't know what all that extra stuff is. That looks like a bug to me. But anyway, the first one is first fragment. And I'm going to make that what it holds initially. It's going to get angry for a second and make the interface kind of go away. So I actually have to tell it, if I can find where it is, unknown fragments, pick layout. I'm going to have it pick the first layout to display because it considers it different in the tools than it does in the actual app. Okay, so this is considered the tool that we're working on, so we can actually make it look different than it would in the app. But right now it's not quite right because this the fragment container view, which I'll leave that name, it's not a big deal. I'm going to actually give this opposing constraints. So remember, this is not a text view that I'm moving. This is an entire fragment. Okay, it just happens to be inside this layout. And in that case, it just happens to have a single text view in it. So pretty good. I could have it, if I want to, I could have it actually match the constraint on both of these. So it kind of takes up the whole thing. And this will be the initial thing we see is this first fragment. Okay. So let's make sure it's loading that just to get started. And then we'll worry about the switching between the fragments. It will load, don't worry, it's the first time. Da, 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 da. Hey, look, Gradle. Gradle's invoked. It's about time, Gradle. Okay. So there's the first fragment. So there's nothing dynamic going on. It doesn't look any different. Wow, what did we gain with all that extra work? Well, nothing yet. So let's kill that application for now. And I'm going to minimize that for a second, and then we'll go back here. So now we're actually going to be dealing with some of the code. I don't really need to change the second fragment's code here. This is mostly generated. Some of this could be deleted, but I'll just leave it. But the first fragment and second fragment are fine the way they are. They're just for the onCreate view, it's inflating the layout kind of in the typical way. We could use binding and just return binding.root. This could have its own binding if we wanted to. But I'm not really worried about those two because they're not ever changing. They're just like kind of static information. So I am, though, wanting to edit what's going on in main activity. So in main activity, now I can use binding .btn. I didn't put a button on there, did I? Well, that was dumb. Okay, main activity. We'll go to the, let me see here, resources, layout. There we go, activity main. All right, so this fragment, actually, we don't want it to take up the whole thing. We want to at least remove that bottom one for now and drag the button on here because we need a button. And then I'm going to constrain the button. And we're going to maybe kind of constrain it to the bottom and then take the fragment and constrain that to the top of the button. There we go. And then maybe put a little bit of space on top with the button, just maybe 8 pixels just to give it a little bit of space. All right, so with the button, I'm going to call it btn change fragment. And we'll change the text on it as well. That's a common feature we might want on it. Text, it's going to say change, let me see here, change fragment. Okay. So go back to main activity. I'm going to do binding dot btn change fragment dot set on click listener. This is our friend you've seen before. Set on click and set on click listener. Okay. And this is where we're going to actually interact with the fragments and the fragment manager. Okay. So I guess the first thing I'm going to do is I need to determine which fragment I'm in and then switch it back and forth. So there's probably no less than a dozen pretty straightforward ways to do that, but I think this one's good. I have this variable up here that I created earlier to determine which fragment I'm currently in. You could test what fragment you're in and all this other stuff, but this is just a simple way to do it. We've got an integer here, everyone's happy. When we switch to the second fragment, I'll switch this number to 2. And when we switch back to the first fragment, I'll switch the number to 1. So we'll be able to tell which fragment we're in at each time. So we know that we set the default fragment to the first fragment. So that's why it starts at 1. So if the which fragment is set to 1, we're going to need to switch it to 2. And if, so switch back to 1. So if it's 1, we want to switch it to 2, the second fragment. And we also want to do this. I guess we have to update this or it's not going to work, right? So we need to do which fragment is updated to 2 in there. And then when you're switching back to 1 down here, we want to do that as well. Okay. So how do we do this? So we have to use the support fragment manager if we're inside the activity. So when you're inside an activity, it's called the support fragment manager. And if you're using Java, you would have to call get support fragment manager, but this allows us to use it as a variable based name. So support fragment manager dot, remember I said we could begin transaction. Now I could grab this as a variable. Like I could say var fragment manager equals support fragment manager, whatever. And I could also just, do it one line at a time. but it's very common actually to cascade these. So I'm actually, this is the same as if I did it up here, by the way. If I did it there, or if I do it down here, it doesn't matter. It's just conventional to tab it in like this. So I'm calling replace, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the id.fragment container view. Remember, that's the container on the main activity. And I'm going to replace this one, since we're switching to the second fragment, using the constructor of the second fragment. With Java, you'd have to put new in front of it, but this is Kotlin, so we do not have to do that. I'm going to actually just literally copy and paste this down here and change it back to, or change it to first fragment. Okay, so we're changing, whenever the fragment is already 1, we switch it to the second one and update which fragment. And when we are number 2, it goes to the else. So it switches it back to the first fragment, and then also records that it's switching back to the first fragment using that simple variable. If it's just 2 fragments, we could just use a Boolean. It doesn't really matter. But it makes logical sense to me that we have fragment 1 and fragment 2. So it seems better to me to do it this way. Okay. Here is our emulator. Hopefully it launches without any major problems and we're able to see the behavior. Okay, there we go. There's your first fragment. Now, if I click change fragment, it didn't do anything. Moment of silence. Everyone, moment of silence. Oh, I never committed it. Remember that thing I said you had to do earlier? Yeah. Okay, so dot replace, you have to do dot commit at the end, or it's never actually going to commit the change. All right. Oh, I wish U of M would stop hiring these dumbasses that can't remember stuff. All right. So, all right. So there's the first fragment. When I click change fragment, it changes to the second fragment, and then you can change it back and forth, and it just toggles them. But you notice it's taking advantage of this fragment container view. Okay. So the fragment container view is the real estate that that fragment can live in, and whatever we defined in there will be in here. This button, on the other hand, in this case, is actually just in the main activity. Now, what you're going to do for your assignment is going to be a little bit different. You're going to make sure that you would have 2 fragments. You have 1 fragment down here, 1 fragment up here. So you might want to look at it as those fragments don't change themselves. But you might have to have more than 1 fragment container view on your main activity. And then you have to decide which fragment loads into each of those. Okay. But very simple app, doesn't do anything life-changing, just to show you how the fragments work. Okay. Next up, if we kill that thing, I'm going to create another nice little shiny project. Does anyone have any questions about the first application? We're going to do one that's a little more complicated and passes data between the 2 applications. Similar, I think it's nearly identical to the one in the book, but what's the point of using 2 fragments in our assignment? The point is so you can show me that you know how to use fragments. Also, it is common to divide a user interface into fragments when doing development, because as you may recall from your software engineering course, or whether you're, I think it's a prereq technically for 436, but even if you're co-requisitely in it or you have taken a software engineering course, you should have probably discussed separation of concerns. And it is a visual view-based technique that's very enforces separation of concerns. So it basically allows each fragment to take advantage of worrying about its own thing. So this one, for example, one fragment might respond to the button presses and things like that. And then as you do that, it sends data to another fragment, which is responsible for displaying it. That may seem redundant, or may seem, well, why don't we just throw it together on a single activity? Well, yeah, it's great for a calculator, but what if you have to do something that has 180 different moving parts? So how do you decide which parts get updated when? And in some cases, to enhance this, what would happen if you wanted to update the calculator so that the display remains the same, but you wanted to update it to make it a scientific calculator, right? Or a some sort of computer calculator, engineering calculator, something like that, which you can do actually with the built-in calculator on Windows. You notice it has a display right now, but that display, it might be changing size and stuff, but except for graphing, all these calculators are really pretty much using the same display here. It's probably not changing the whole thing. But even if it is, the calculator app itself is swapping out this thing. But my guess is it's swapping out the bottom portion. So this just gets bigger because it can accommodate it. Okay, how about the bottom fragment for buttons? What dynamic uses? It's not always about dynamic uses. Now, I just showed you how to update the fragment dynamically. But like the example I just showed you, you could, in fact, decide that the calculator, the button set changes depending on the maybe type of calculator you're asking. Fragments, using fragments is not generally more resource intensive. No, actually, if anything, it will generally save resources because you're loading portions of a screen, and it actually, for the amount of, if it is losing any efficiency, which it probably isn't, but if it is losing any efficiency, what you're gaining in the ability to separate the concerns and let the program be more modular and more maintainable is worth the incredibly small hit. Okay, you won't generally be able to tell performance-wise if you're using an application that's using activities, full activities, versus using one that uses fragments. So I would say that in general, using fragments is actually a really good idea. Good questions. Any other questions before we do the next example? Okay. All right, let's create another project. In this case, we're going to do another empty activity, and we'll call this, oh, I don't know. It's kind of redundant, I guess, fragment example. I don't know. Fragment with toolbar, fragment example toolbars, something like that. And Kotlin, fragment example toolbars, hit finish. All right, let this thing do its thing for a moment. And of course, we're going to enable view binding so that we have access to that, and synchronize Gradle again. And then we're going to, again, create additional fragments. But in this case, it's going to be a little bit more interesting, hopefully, because we're going to have different components on it. See, after it's done it the first time, it seems a lot faster. Okay, so okay, view binding. So we'll do that first, just so we don't forget. Let's go in here and do build features. And synchronize. Okay, so it is synchronized now. So let's get our binding set up just to do that. So private late init var binding of type activity main binding, as done before. Binding equals the activity main binding dot inflate, the layout inflator. And of course, we have, for now, binding dot root. All right, so let's create the first fragment, and then we'll create a second fragment. So we'll set them up. This time we'll do maybe a different workflow, but I'm going to right click here, go to new fragment, and then fragment blank template, and we're going to call this one toolbar fragment. Okay, toolbar fragment. Make sure I spelled it right. Using Kotlin, hit finish. There's our toolbar fragment. I'm going to go to the layout file here, and I'm going to convert this to a constraint layout like I did before. We got the default options. I'm going to delete this default text view for now. Don't really need that. I am going to rename it just because it bothers me that it's calling it frame layout when it's actually constraint layout. But so we'll just call it constraint layout 1. That's not usually a good name, but it's the one in the toolbar. Or you know what? Actually, I like that better. Constraint layout toolbar. There we go. Okay, now we're going to add the following. So we're going to add an edit text, we're going to add a seek bar, and we're going to add a button. Okay, so an edit text, so plain text, edit text. We're going to add a seek bar, which is a, I guess that would be just under widget. Okay, so just a seek bar. All right. And we're going to add a button. Okay, so we'll add a button. All right, we're going to set the posing constraints on the edit text as expected. And I'm going to set the ID of this guy right here, the edit text to just, this is going to be simple, edit text 1. All right, and then I'm going to remove the name out of here, the text that says name on it. I'm going to remove that so it just shows up. And then let me grab my seek bar right here. I'm going to set the ID to, we're just going to be real simple on this one. I'll say seek bar 1 on that. And for this one, I'm going to set the layout width to match constraint. Okay. And we haven't set constraints yet, but we're going to set the right and left margins. So I'm going to set that, and then we're going to set this margin right here to 16 on that side and 16 on that side. Okay, so it's taking up almost the entire screen except for 16 density independent pixels on both sides. Let's make sure I give it a name, seek bar 1. I've got edit text. Okay. I'm going to actually constrain that to the top. I'm going to constrain the seek bar to the bottom of this and drag that down a little bit. Good. And now the button, I'm going to set its opposing constraints. Sorry. Here we go. And then set its top constraint to the bottom of the seek bar. If I can grab it, there we go. Okay, set my top, the bottom's top, or the bottom's top, the button's top to the seek bar's bottom. Okay, and we'll have that. Now for the button, I'm going to change the ID to button 1. Again, not a very good name, but we'll just work with it. The 1's at the end of everything. So we remember we're in this first fragment, the toolbar fragment. We could call it TB button or button toolbar or toolbar button or whatever, BTN toolbar. Okay, so so we got the layout looking pretty decent. It's got opposing constraints. I guess the button should probably have the actual text on it changed. Where is it? Text. Okay, there we go. So we're actually going to have it say change text. All right. And now in the toolbar fragment Kotlin file, I'm going to close that for now. Toolbar fragment Kotlin file, I'm going to do a little bit of updating here. I don't think I need the majority of this stuff. I don't think I need that. I don't need those. I don't need that because we're not saving arguments. That's fine. We'll fix that. I don't need the companion object, I don't think. Okay, oops. Okay, so I think we can get rid of all that. I am going to make a binding, so private late init var. You can call it binding inside here because we're in a different scope, right? It's inside of the toolbar fragment rather than inside of main, so it is fine. Fragment toolbar binding is the type. And then in here, well, actually not there, but the on create view, I'm going to create the binding or set the binding. So fragment toolbar binding dot inflate. And this time I pass it the inflator, which is one of the arguments to the on create view. So it's a little bit different than what we did in the activities, but inflator, container, and then this last we can put a true or false that has to do with attaching to the parent. So I've got that binding. Now down here, instead of returning inflator.inflate and all that stuff, I've already done the inflating. So I'm just going to return. And just like an activity, when we set content, when we set the content view, I'm going to do binding.root or get root if you're using Java. Okay. All right. So now let's create the second fragment. Then we're going to start bringing stuff together. So I'm going to create another blank fragment. So right up here, right click, new, and then fragment blank. I'm going to call this sucker text fragment. Okay. So it'll create a layout called fragment underscore text. I'm going to hit finish. All right. And let's work on the interface first. So I'm going to right click the frame layout, convert it to a constraint layout, change its name because that's a dumb name. We're going to call it constraint layout text view, right? Or text fragment, I guess. And I'm going to delete that text view. I'm going to so we're starting from scratch. I still need a text view, so I could have reused the one that was there, but I'm just going to drag one onto here. And then I'm going to center it with opposing constraints. So one over there, one over there. I'm going to change the ID. Actually, you know what? Let's do the top and the bottom too. So top and bottom. And then I'm going to change its ID. It's already called text view 2, so I guess that'll be fine. We'll just remember that that's what we're doing it with. Probably make more sense to call it something like output text or something like that. The text in it is going to say, for now, we'll just change it to say fragment 2. We're going to change the text appearance. So we could make the text size or the style large. We could change the text size directly here. That's fine. I guess 20 is good. Okay. Now we're going to add code now to the text fragment Kotlin file. So kind of similarly to what we did before, there's a lot of stuff in here we don't really need. That's kind of passed in by default. Don't need that. Okay, the imports we keep. I don't need that, and we don't need the companion object for what we're doing here. All right. So let's private late init var binding of type fragment text binding. And again, inside of the on create view, we are going to create our binding here. Binding equals, it's fragment text binding dot inflate. And then this is going to pass a couple additional things that we didn't deal with main again. The inflator, the container, and false. Or flosse, whichever you prefer. So false. And then we're going to return binding dot root. Okay. So that's pretty much that. It's just basically showing the text fragment, right? So now we're going to add the activities or add the fragments to the activity. So inside of the activity here, I'm going to delete this default text view. It's already a constraint layout, so I don't need to worry about that. I'm going to have the fragment container view. So I'm going to drag that onto here. I'm going to pick the toolbar fragment. Okay. And again, it's going to complain because it doesn't know what it's supposed to look like inside of here. So I'm actually going to pick the layout. So I'm going to show the toolbar fragment again. There we go. Now I can see everything. And let me see here. This one I'm going to, I guess I have to add some things as well. Okay, so I've got this red warning, blah, blah, blah. Did I forget something? Pick layout, fragment toolbar, got that. Da, 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 da. Oh, that's what I forgot. Okay, so the layout width, I'm going to change that to match constraint. Okay, and we have not added a constraint yet, so we do need to do that. So let's do that, 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 and that. And again, this is a fragment, right? So it's a fragment that's inside of it's a fragment container that's holding that fragment, and we're seeing which fragment it's going to initially show. Okay. All right. So we could also make the height to match it, but we're not going to right now. So what I'm going to do now, actually, I guess let's get rid of that one for now. I'm going to drag another fragment container view down to the bottom here. We're putting it below the toolbar view, and I'm going to make that one the text fragment. Okay. Same thing here. It gets angry because it's not sure what we're going to, what it's supposed to show in the design view. So we're going to tell it I want fragment text. So it's going to show that fragment 2 down here. Kind of a same thing here. We're going to change its ID to text fragment. Okay, make sure that that's good. We're going to set the opposing constraints on both fragments. Okay, and that one goes there, that one goes there. So as far as we're seeing, we see one layout on the top and then one on this bottom, but it's really just two things. We've got two fragment containers. We're going to call this, well, here, yeah, text fragment's fine, I guess. Okay, opposing constraints, top toolbar. Let me see here. What do we want to do? I probably want that to come down a little bit. So let's do 32 from the top. Okay, and then the bottom fragment, this is the text one. Let's say that's fine, I guess. It's fine the way, I think it's fine the way it was. I'll just make sure that one's good, make sure that one's good. Yeah, okay. All right, now we want to make the toolbar fragment, which is this top one, talk to the activity. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have the activity pass on the data to the fragment on the bottom. Okay, so let's go to the toolbar fragment. So I'm going to close the interfaces for now. Let me see here, toolbar fragment. Here's our toolbar fragment. We've got our binding already set up. I'm going to set a default seek value here. We'll set that to 10. And then I'm going to have this thing called activity callback. And it's going to be toolbar fragment dot toolbar listener question equals null. Okay, now it's going to be kind of confused right now because we haven't created this yet, but here's how we're going to do it. We are inside the class. We've just created this activity callback, but it doesn't know what toolbar listener is. So we're actually going to create an interface. This is actually kind of a clever way to do it. And again, there are different techniques for doing this, but this is a pretty clever way of doing it. You'll recall that an interface, same in Kotlin as it is in Java, should or doesn't actually in actuality, although they have some, you know, shortcut syntax and stuff, but an interface does not have implementations. Remember, ain't got no body. See, same thing here. Okay, but what an interface does is it says something is claiming when it says it inherits from toolbar listener or is a toolbar listener. Whatever it is has to implement whatever method you put in there. Okay, and in this case, I'm basically saying, okay, activity callback, toolbar fragment, toolbar listener. So whatever this activity callback is, it's going to represent something that implements the toolbar listener. Okay, in other words, it has to implement this on button click, okay, which takes a position and a text string, okay? So that'll have to have something to do probably with the slider. The toolbar is going to be able to communicate with something else by the slider and also the text inside the edit text that we're typing into, okay? So now above on create, I don't know that I even need on create. Am I using on create? You know what? I don't care about it. I'm just gonna, I use on create view, but I'm just gonna leave that. So on create or on attach rather, override fun on attach. So when it attaches to the activity, okay. What we're gonna do in here, I guess it needs to know what context is, right? We'll import that library, and this one needs super call. Inside here, I'm going to try something nice and clever. This involves my activity callback here. I'm going to have a, why is it doing that? That's obnoxious. I shouldn't need that. Okay. So if there's an exception, we're just going to throw a class cast exception and have it rethrown and just say must implement toolbar listener. Okay, so the thing that we try to pass, or the thing that it tries to interact with, the activity, if that activity does not implement the toolbar listener, then it's going to throw an exception. Because what we're going to do here is I'm going to say activity callback. Remember, that is something I'm claiming is something of type toolbar listener. Now, what am I setting it to, though? Well, context, that's going to be the main, the activity essentially is its context. And when I say context as toolbar listener, that is me doing a cast, an explicit cast. But if the thing does not implement toolbar listener, this will crash. Okay, so we need to be aware of that. Okay, so on create doesn't do anything magical. On create view does though. Okay, so we've got the binding going on. What else am I doing? Oh, I know. Oh, I guess I could do that. Yeah, that would work. Okay. So I'm going to create another method just to have it ready. This is going to be button clicked because there's a lot going on. I'm going to say private fun button clicked, and it takes a view. And then this one is going to be up here. I'm going to just say binding dot button one set on click listener. And I'm going to set it so that all it does is it literally just it takes this well, I guess it could be it, right? Button clicked it. There we go. I think that should work. And then this returns binding.root. So I'm just kind of offloading this so it calls another method to make it a little bit cleaner. All right, so the button clicked. What I want to do in here is see if I'm forgetting anything. Button clicked activity. Okay, yeah, not much going on. Okay, that's fine. So activity callback. So this is the activity callback. It is a field of this class, so I have access to it. So percent, because this could be null. So you're trying to do a safe call on this. So the button click has to pass in seek value and binding.edit text 1.text.to string. So it's going to grab the text from the edit text and pass that in as the second argument. And on button click, this is the seek value. That, as you'll recall, is something we've created as a property, okay, or a field, okay? And then what I want to do is, in addition to inheriting from this fragment here, I want to also implement seekbar.on seekbar change listener. Okay, it has to know what seekbar is. So we got to import that. And then it's going to complain because we're not implementing the methods we're claiming to. So I'm going to click implement members. I'm going to grab all of these, hit OK. It'll put those at the bottom. And we're going to implement those. Okay, so these are the events associated with the seek bar. I believe we looked at a switch. I don't know if we looked at a seek bar. I can't remember. Maybe we did. I think maybe we did. I seem to recall we did. But we've got these seek bar methods here. So seek bar event handler methods. All right. So the only one I'm really interested in, I'm not really interested in on start tracking touch or tracking touch, and then on stop tracking touch. We need them there even if they're implemented or if they're empty. And we don't want it to throw an exception, so we don't really want a to do or anything like that. Otherwise, we'll get something like an unimplemented exception. Now, all we're going to do here is I'm setting this value here, seek value, which is a field of this class, to whatever the progress is on this seek bar. And that seek bar has this internal value called the progress. As you drag it, it changes that value. So I'm just basically setting the seek value to the progress. That's really all I need right now. And then whatever it's set to, when they click the button, it's going to call on button click from the activity callback, which we're going to have to implement in main activity. That's what this button clicked is. Or on button click, and we're going to pass in the seek value. So it's going to know what value we put there and also what text we got from the fragment. Okay, so we need all that information. We're going to go into main activity. All right, and in this case, I've already set up the fragment stuff again. So this one, I want it to, it's implementing, it could be fragment activity, but app compat activity should be fine. Let's do toolbar fragment. Remember, because I said this thing has to be a toolbar listener. We just created that interface over here. Remember, because we said whoever claims that they're implementing this has to implement this method called on button click. Now, the reason we needed that is because we want to, when the user actually clicks the button on this fragment, we want to call directly to the activity and call its method, okay, on button click. So this is what we call a callback method. Okay, I can actually close the interface there. So right here, I've got the content view and all that fun stuff set, but you'll notice that it's complaining now because we added this. The reason it's complaining, if I hover over it, it says public abstract fun on button click defined in toolbars, tool fragment, tool listener. And it's basically saying it's not abstract. Main activity is not abstract and does not implement the abstract member. So since this is not abstract, I have to implement it, right? So I'm saying, hey, implement it. There you go. I've got my on button click. Now, what do I do when they click that button? Well, I have to grab the information from the other fragment. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'll say text fragment. I'm going to refer to the fragment, the second fragment, the one on the bottom. And I'm going to say, okay, support fragment manager. How about you find the fragment by ID? I could use binding and do some stuff with that, but this is probably simpler for us for now. I want to grab that text fragment and cast it as a text fragment. So support fragment manager, find fragment by ID only returns a regular old fragment. We're casting it here to make sure it knows that it has the special abilities of whatever this text fragment is that we're defining over here. So once I do that, I'm going to say text fragment dot, and I'm going to call, this hasn't been defined yet, but it's change text properties. And I'm going to pass in the font size and text. Okay, where is the font size? Did I declare that somewhere? Oh, on button click. I have it as position. That's not supposed to be position. That's supposed to be a font size, because we're actually controlling some font size here. I think I want to change that over in the toolbar fragment, because I think I did it wrong. I named it wrong. Okay, it'll still work, but it's just a dumb name. So we'll do font size here. Okay, because that's what it's controlling. It's going to basically pass in the text that it wants the text view to display, and also the seek bar is determining what size the font will be. Okay, so we'll go back down here. This change text properties is not implemented. If I hit Alt Enter, I could actually tell it to create a member function or extension function or do a bunch of other stuff, or I could just go over there and actually implement it. So change text properties in the text fragment. Let me see here. Did I miss it? Oh, must have left it out of my notes. Well, that's sucky. That's fine. We'll finish it. No big deal. Okay, so what did I call it? So I called it change text properties on the text fragment. Okay, so let's do it. We'll say change, well, no, it's not an override, so it's just public change text, sorry, public fun change text properties, and it text properties. Yeah, text properties. Okay, so it takes a font size and a text. Okay, so font size of type int, text of type string. I think that's good. And then we give it a body, right? Oops. Okay, that should have got rid of that error. Okay, now what we're doing is I'm going to say binding dot the text view 2. I'm going to say text size. I'm going to set the text size equal to font size. And I'm going to say, wait, that doesn't seem right. Something's not right. Oh, you know what? It's a float. Do I have to just change it to a float? I think it takes it as an int, so I'm just going to say to float. No biggie. Okay, and then binding dot text view 2 dot text is just being set to the text that's passed in as an argument. Okay. All right. What is this? This is complaining typo in font size. There's no typo. I think it's fine. Okay, on create view always returns non-null. Okay, that's a good thing. Okay, redundant visibility. I guess the default's public, so I guess we actually don't need that. Okay, on create view always returns null. Redundant overriding method. Did I do it? Oh, yeah, it's redundant because it's not needed. We don't need it. Okay, because we're not doing anything extra in on create. So if we just, if it's just empty other than, saying call my parents stuff, then you don't need to even override it, because that's kind of stupid. Because when the system looks at this fragment, text fragment, and wants to call on create, it's going to look at the parents version if there's none in here. So that was just redundant and unnecessary. Okay, so now hopefully, as long as I didn't goof, we should have an interesting application to look at. Okay, all right, so I see text down here. I probably would have to adjust some of the features here if I wanted it to be a little better, but I'm gonna type some text in here. I'll just put John, okay, and then approve that, and I'm gonna change this font size. See, it's very small, but I can actually apparently not change it because it doesn't like that. Let me see, what's it doing? It's not doing it at all. What did I break, guys? What did I break? Okay, text view, font size, dot float, font size. Maybe that thing about the misspelling might have been right about something. Okay, change text properties. Let's see what we broke. Help me find what I broke. Did I break it? Well, it's good to have errors because then we can figure out what's going on. So on button click, let's make sure main activity, and we'll say in on button click, and then it'll say with font size. It's getting the text, so I'm only worried about the font size right now. And we need to import log, so we can do some debugging here. Let's try it again. Going to run that sucker, clear the log cat. Okay, I'm going to clear that, and I'm going to hit type John, hit that, and then let's come on now, check. It's going to say John, which it does. Okay, so it goes there with size 10, and then it still says size 10. So that's interesting. So something's not working when the toolbar fragment is setting its the seek value to the progress. Is that getting reset somewhere? Maybe. Let's see over here. On progress changed. Is that what I was supposed to override? That seems right. From user seek value is progress. Okay, let's see if it's getting in here. So log.i toolbar fragment. I'm going to see if it will say the progress is, and then progress. Okay. Try it again, folks. We will get to the bottom of this. Also, a lot of you have been asking like questions. I've noticed some over Discord private messaging and emails and stuff. Use logcat. Logcat is actually really, really useful, and you can use logging to try to see like what the data looks like at any given point without depending so much on the interface. So that's what I'm kind of using right now to try to give me an idea of why this may not be working properly. So I'm going to say John, and let's see, change text. So it's size 10, which we expected. I'm going to drag it. Now that still thinks it's size 10. So something's definitely wrong here. You know what? I bet I missed telling it. Oh, I know what it is. I think I know what it is. The seek bar doesn't know that these methods are for him. So let me go up into the on create view in the toolbar fragment on create view. Yeah, so I paid a lot of attention to the button and forgot to set some of the stuff for the seek bar. Okay, so above this doesn't really matter, but above this, well, that part matters, but above where I set the button, I'm going to say seek bar 1 dot set on seek bar change listener, and since I'm defining it as methods of this class, the toolbar fragment, and I claimed this is a seek bar listener, this entire class can act as the seek bar listener, so I can put the methods at the top level, okay? And then it should behave properly. Okay, let's see. See, we love the logcat. All right, let's do John here. Okay, I don't know why it's doing that, but okay, there. All right, so we've got John there. If I go to change text, it makes it size 10. It's very, very tiny right there, very hard to see. Change text, you'll notice it changes size now. Right, some of this is going to go off because it's or possibly, yeah, a little bit. Oh, that's actually kind of perfect. All right, so really cool. So we're sending data. We're sending an edit text data or just regular text data from the top fragment to the bottom fragment right here. This button is attached to this top fragment, and then this text view is on the bottom. So the seek bar and this, the data built inside of those is being sent when I click the change text button. So that is, as the progress changes, all it does is update the internal value of that property. But when I actually call the button or click the button in the toolbar fragment, which is on top, it in turn calls its activity, the activity method, on button click, which it can do because activity is a toolbar listener, which is an interface we defined. So we've basically kind of done the same thing they do with things like on seek bar change listener. That's an interface, just like we wrote. It's a way for it to communicate with different parts. Okay, so we're sending data from two different components in the top fragment to the bottom fragment. You could do that in reverse, obviously. I don't know, like if you hit a button in one fragment, it could update the display in another fragment, right? If that sounds familiar. Yes? Yes? Are you all dead? No? Okay. So I will upload the code for this, okay? Getting a couple thumbs up. Some of you like A's, that's good. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay, this one was a little bit more complicated. We have cross fragment communication going on. So it's different than the first one, which just showed us how do we load two different, completely different fragments in the same fragment container. This one is a little bit different because it's allowing for two separate fragments to communicate with one another, but they're not actually changing dynamically. Okay, and we could do any combination of those. All right, so just keep that in mind. Any questions? Any questions? Because after we get off here, and when I end the meeting, I will it will take it a little while, and Zoom will generate a recording for me, and I will take that recording and then upload it to YouTube if anyone needs to review it. And then the 58 people who didn't show up tonight, so some of whom were probably because of power outages, which are pretty rampant right now, and then some are pretending they have a power outage or taking a nap, which is okay. I understand. All right, any questions? No. Okay.
Would it be?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Would it be kind of like messed up if we emailed you about project one over the break for help?
No, it's not messed up at all.
Okay,
I
cool.
don't. You have the assumption that anyone who's your professor actually gets a break occasionally. We don't. So no, it's totally fine. I'll be answering emails from pretty much all my students in both institutions. I'll try to keep up on that. So if you email or if you say something in Discord, I'm on a lot. So some of you noted that you got answers at like 3 a.m. and things like that. It's because I sleep about an hour a day, something like that. So any other questions? That was a lie. I sleep too much. It's just at the wrong times. No. All right. I will upload both of these projects. You are welcome to leave. I will actually stop the recording. If you give me 1 second here. Stop recording.